Legend has it that she was born on Tuesday Legi, a sacred day in the traditional Javanese calendar. Because of that, some people gave her a name whispered only in old stories, Tulangwangi. After she disappeared, the village suddenly prospered. The fields turned green, the rivers flowed again, the people became wealthy. But no one realized that prosperity had come with a price, a debt that would one day demand payment. This is the story of the return of Tulangwangi. 13 years after vanishing on the sacred night when Tuesday Legi coincided with the First Night of Suro, she returned, not to ask for justice, but to collect it. 13 years earlier, nestled among rolling rice fields and dense forests, stood a quiet village called Wonosari. For generations, its people had lived simple lives. Every morning, farmers walked barefoot across dew-covered paddies. Children laughed along the riverbank. The sound of birds echoed through the trees as the sun slowly rose above the hills. Life was never luxurious, but it was peaceful, until everything changed. The dry season arrived earlier than anyone expected. At first, the villagers thought it would pass in a few weeks. It never did. The sky remained cloudless day after day. Weeks turned into months. Not a single drop of rain fell. The once fertile rice fields cracked open beneath the relentless heat. The river that had nourished the village for generations slowly shrank into a trail of muddy puddles. Livestock began dying from thirst. Rice stores grew dangerously low. Each passing day brought another family closer to starvation. Every night, the cries of hungry children echoed through the village. Some families packed what little they owned and left in search of work in distant cities. Others stayed behind, holding on to hope, praying that tomorrow the rain would finally come. But tomorrow never changed. Among those who remained was an 18-year-old girl named Dian. She was known by everyone in Wonosari, not because she came from a wealthy family, not because of her beauty, but because kindness seemed to follow wherever she went. Every morning, she helped her mother prepare meals before sunrise. In the afternoons, she visited sick neighbors, bringing food and medicine whenever she could. As evening approached, children gathered around her to learn how to read the Quran. She never expected anything in return. Helping others simply felt natural to her. Even during the hardest days, her smile never disappeared. To the villagers, Dian represented hope, a reminder that goodness could still exist even when life seemed impossible. Yet there was something unusual about her, something few people dared to speak about. Since the day she was born, the village elders had quietly watched over her, not because they feared her, but because of when she was born. Dian entered the world on Tuesday Legi, a day considered spiritually significant in the ancient Javanese calendar. According to an old belief preserved by only a handful of elders, children born under this rare combination were sometimes called Tulangwangi. The phrase carried no simple translation. Some believed it referred to someone chosen by unseen spiritual forces. Others believed such a person possessed an extraordinary destiny, one that could bring either great blessings or unimaginable tragedy. Most younger villagers dismissed the story as nothing more than an old myth. But the elders never laughed. Instead, they remained silent, because they believed the fewer people who knew the meaning of Tulangwangi, the safer Dian would be. One quiet evening, the oldest elder in Wonosari, Karto, visited Dian's home. He sat silently on the wooden porch, watching the crimson sunset disappear behind the hills. Dian brought him a cup of warm tea. "You've been staring at the sky for a long time, Grandpa," she said with a gentle smile. Karto looked at her for several seconds before speaking. "Dian, if one day many people begin looking for you, never believe it's because you're more special than anyone else." Dian laughed softly. "Who would ever come looking for me?" The old man smiled, but sadness lingered behind his eyes. "Sometimes. People don't seek someone because that person is extraordinary. They seek them because someone else's greed has become greater than their humanity. Diane didn't understand his words. She simply nodded politely. Neither of them realized those would become the most important words she would ever hear. Only a few days later, the village hall filled with anxious faces. Farmers, merchants, village leaders. Every seat was occupied. Everyone carried the same fear. The drought had become unbearable. One farmer stood up, gripping his woven bamboo hat tightly. If this continues, how are our children supposed to survive? Another man answered with trembling hands. Our debts keep growing. The harvest is gone. Our cattle are dying. The room grew heavier with every voice. Then, the village chief slowly rose from his seat. His expression was pale, his voice barely above a whisper. Perhaps. It's time we look for another way. The room fell silent. Across the hall, Bakarto immediately lifted his head. His eyes hardened. No. His voice echoed through the building. There are paths that seem easy, but the sins they create will be inherited by your children and your grandchildren. No one answered, but several villagers lowered their heads. Desperation had begun replacing reason, and history has shown that when despair meets greed, humanity often loses. The meeting ended, but no one truly went home in peace. The villagers returned to their houses, carrying the same unbearable weight, the fear that Wonosari was dying. Days passed. The drought only grew worse. The fields were now nothing more than cracked earth. The river had almost vanished. Children no longer laughed. Instead, their cries echoed through the village every night. The people had begun to lose something even more precious than food. They were losing hope. Then one evening, a quiet rumor spread from one house to another. No one knew who started it. No one dared speak it aloud. Yet somehow, everyone who needed to hear it did. There was someone. A mysterious man who lived beyond the forest. A man said to possess knowledge that no ordinary human should ever possess. Some claimed he had lived there for decades without aging. Others whispered that he wasn't entirely human at all. No one knew the truth. But desperate people rarely questioned dangerous stories. That same night, 6 men quietly slipped away from the village. Among them, the village chief, several wealthy landowners, and 2 respected elders who had long abandoned their faith in miracles. None of them carried torches. None of them spoke. Only the pale moon guided them through a narrow trail leading into the forest. The deeper they walked, the colder the air became. Not the ordinary chill of midnight, but the kind of cold that made every breath feel heavy, as if the forest itself wanted them to turn back. After nearly an hour of walking, they reached an abandoned pavilion standing alone on top of a hill. The building looked ancient. Its wooden pillars had darkened with age. Strange carvings covered the beams. The air smelled of burning incense, though no fire could be seen. Inside, someone was already waiting. A man dressed entirely in black robes. His face was partially hidden beneath a hood. The flickering oil lamp revealed only his pale lips, and a pair of eyes that seemed far older than any living man. No one asked who he was. Somehow, they already knew. The robed man slowly raised his head. I've been expecting you. His voice was calm, almost gentle, yet every word seemed to weigh heavily upon the room. The 6 men sat down without speaking. Silence lingered between them. Then the stranger finally asked, Tell me, have you come to save your village? Or merely yourselves? No one answered. Not because they didn't have an answer, but because they all knew it. The silence itself became their confession. A faint smile appeared beneath the stranger's hood. He reached beside him and slowly unrolled an ancient cloth covered in faded Javanese script. The symbols were unlike anything most of them had ever seen. Some resembled prayers. Others looked more like warnings. The man gently rested his hand upon the cloth. Every desire has a price. The village chief swallowed hard. What must we give? The stranger looked into each of their eyes, one by one, then quietly replied, I ask for neither gold nor land, nor power. He paused, long enough for every heartbeat inside the pavilion to become painfully loud. What I require is a young woman, a woman whom the old traditions call Tulangwangi. The room instantly fell silent. No one dared move, no one dared breathe, because every man inside that pavilion was thinking of the very same person, Diane. No one needed to say her name. It already echoed inside every guilty mind. The village chief finally broke the silence. There must be another way. There is, the stranger answered calmly. You may refuse. You may return home. You may watch your fields die. You may watch your children starve. And you may watch your village disappear forever. Again, silence. It felt as though the entire hill had stopped breathing. One of the wealthiest rice merchants suddenly stood. No, I won't be part of this. He's only a child. Without another word, he turned toward the exit. The robed man did not stop him. Instead, he simply smiled. No one is ever forced to bargain with darkness. The merchant froze. His hand rested upon the old wooden door. Outside, the wind carried the distant cries of hungry children from the village below. He closed his eyes. His shoulders trembled. Slowly, he let go of the door. Then, he walked back, without saying another word. The stranger nodded quietly. I understand. He carefully rolled up the ancient cloth. If your decision has been made, then the ritual will take place. On the night when Tuesday Legi falls upon the first night of Suro, the veil between worlds will be at its thinnest. The offering will be accepted. The oil lamp suddenly flickered. A cold gust swept through the pavilion. For just a brief moment, every man present thought they heard a young woman softly crying somewhere beyond the trees. None of them dared look outside. When the meeting finally ended, the 6 men descended the hill without speaking. The moon still hung high above the forest. Yet somehow, everything felt darker than before. They had entered the forest as desperate men. They left it, carrying something far worse, a secret, one that would stain their souls forever. Far away, back in Wonosari. Diane was sitting beside her mother, laughing gently as they prepared tomorrow's breakfast. She had no idea that while she smiled beneath the warm light of her home, her fate had already been decided. By men she had trusted all her life. Some secrets do not remain buried for long. Even before the chosen night arrived, something had already begun to stir around Diane. At first, it seemed harmless, almost beautiful, until people realized that beauty sometimes serves as darkness's perfect disguise. One quiet evening, Diane awoke to an unfamiliar scent drifting through her room. It was the fragrance of fresh jasmine. Soft, sweet, almost comforting. She slowly opened her eyes. The room was dark. Moonlight poured gently through the wooden window. She sat up and looked around. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Only the sound of leaves rustling outside. Curious, she walked toward the window. As she pushed it open, a cool breeze brushed across her face. The village lay silent beneath the moonlight. There was no one outside. No movement. No sign of anyone passing by. Then, she noticed something resting on the windowsill, a single white jasmine flower. Its petals were still covered in fresh dew, as though it had just been picked moments earlier. Diane gently lifted it into her hand. She smiled. It was beautiful. But something didn't make sense. There wasn't a single jasmine tree anywhere near her family's home. The following morning, she casually mentioned the flower to her mother. It must have blown here with the wind, her mother replied with a gentle laugh. Neither of them thought much about it, but someone else had overheard the conversation. Standing just outside the house, Bakarto's expression suddenly changed. The color drained from his face. For a long moment, he stared silently at the flower in Diane's hand. He knew. This was no coincidence. That evening, the old elder returned. He carried 2 simple objects with him, an old piece of batik cloth and a wooden prayer bead necklace polished smooth by decades of use. He handed both to Diane. Keep these close. She looked at him with quiet confusion. Is something wrong, Grandpa? Mbakarto forced a faint smile. There are some questions that are safer left unanswered. He paused before continuing. Starting tonight, do not leave this house after sunset, no matter who calls your name. Dian frowned slightly. Even if it's someone I know. The old man's eyes became unusually serious, especially if it's someone you know. Dian wanted to ask more, but something in Mbakarto's voice told her not to. Before leaving, the old man quietly whispered a prayer beneath his breath. He rarely showed fear. Tonight, he couldn't hide it. Meanwhile, inside the village chief's home, the 6 conspirators gathered once again. This time, their hesitation had disappeared. The decision had already been made. Now, they only needed a plan. One man suggested taking Dian by force. Another immediately shook his head. If we do that, everyone will know. It has to look like she simply disappeared. Silence filled the room once more. Finally, the village chief spoke. We lure her father away. When the house is unprotected, we take the girl. One by one, the others nodded. No one objected. No one mentioned turning back. Each passing day made it harder to admit they had already gone too far. Outside, the village continued its ordinary routines. Children still chased each other through dusty roads. Women gathered water from nearly dry wells. Farmers wandered across empty fields, pretending there was still hope. Only Dian remained completely unaware. She greeted everyone with the same warm smile. She shared food with hungry neighbors. She comforted crying children. She thanked God each morning, despite having almost nothing herself. It was that kindness that made what was coming even more unforgivable. The day before the ritual, the sky changed. Although the sun had not yet set, dark clouds suddenly gathered above Wonosari. The air became strangely heavy. Birds abandoned the trees all at once, their frantic cries echoing across the fields. Village dogs began howling without reason. Even the livestock grew restless. An elderly woman hurried outside, closing every window before the evening call to prayer. She whispered quietly to herself, It's beginning. Across the village, Mbakarto stood before an old Javanese calendar hanging inside his home. His hands trembled. His eyes remained fixed upon one date. Tuesday Legi, the first night of Suro, the very combination he had feared for years. He slowly lowered himself onto the prayer mat. Tears rolled down his weathered face. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, he prayed, "O Allah, if there is still another path, please, save that child." As midnight approached, an unnatural silence settled over Wonosari. No crickets, no frogs, no night birds. Even the wind itself seemed to have vanished. It felt as though the entire world had paused, waiting for something terrible to begin. Far beyond the village, 6 dark figures quietly stepped out of the shadows. Without speaking, they walked toward a single destination, Dian's house. None of them noticed that from the darkness beneath an old banyan tree, Bakarto was watching. Tightly gripping his wooden staff, the old man whispered through tears, "The greatest sins are almost always committed by people who convince themselves they are doing the right thing." Above them, the moon disappeared behind thick black clouds, and somewhere deep within the silent forest, the faint fragrance of jasmine returned once again. Night finally came. Not an ordinary night, but the one the elders had feared for generations. Tuesday Legi, the first night of Suro. According to ancient Javanese belief, this was the moment when the boundary between the living and the unseen grew dangerously thin. The moon disappeared behind thick clouds. Not a single star remained visible. Even the wind refused to blow. The silence felt unnatural, as if the world itself had stopped breathing. Inside her small wooden house, Dian sat beside her mother, reciting quiet evening prayers. The oil lamp flickered gently. For a brief moment, peace still existed. Then, 3 slow knocks echoed from the front door. Knock, knock, knock. Her father looked toward the entrance. Who could be visiting this late? He opened the door. Standing outside was one of the village farmers. His face was pale. His clothes were covered in dirt. He looked terrified. Please, my wife is dying. I need your help. Without hesitation, Diane's father grabbed his lantern. I'll come immediately, the man nodded, then both disappeared into the darkness. Neither of them noticed that the desperate farmer never carried a lantern of his own, nor did he cast a shadow beneath the moonless sky. Minutes passed. Then came another knock, this time softer, almost gentle. Diane stood. I'll see who it is. Before she reached the door, her mother's voice suddenly stopped her. Wait, the older woman frowned. Didn't Bakarto tell us? Never to answer anyone after sunset? Silence. Another knock. This time, it came from the back door, then from the window, then from the side wall. 3 different sounds, 3 different directions, yet somehow, all at the exact same moment. A cold shiver ran down Diane's spine. The jasmine fragrance returned, but stronger than ever before. So strong, it almost became suffocating. The flame of the oil lamp suddenly stretched sideways, though there was no wind. Then, a familiar voice stood through the darkness. Diane? It was her father's voice. I'm home. Her mother froze. No, she whispered. Your father hasn't returned. Again, the voice called. Exactly the same, Diane. Open the door. Something scratched slowly across the wooden wall outside. Long, slow, deliberate. Far across the village, Mbakarto suddenly opened his eyes during prayer. His heart pounded violently. They've begun. Without hesitation, the old man grabbed his wooden staff and ran into the darkness. His aging legs struggled across the rocky path. Each breath became heavier than the last. He knew, if he arrived too late, everything would be lost. Back at Diane's home, the knocking suddenly stopped. Complete silence. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, the front door burst open. 6 masked men rushed inside. Diane screamed. Her mother fought desperately, throwing herself between the attackers and her daughter. One of the men shoved her violently aside. She struck the wooden floor. Unable to rise, Diane struggled. She cried. She kicked. She begged. Please! What have I done? No one answered. The men avoided looking into her eyes, perhaps because they knew they no longer deserved to. Outside, rain clouds finally gathered, but instead of rain, ashes drifted slowly from the sky, gray, weightless, covering the ground like snow. The villagers quietly watched from behind closed windows. Some recognized the men carrying Diane away. Some recognized her desperate screams. Yet not a single door opened. Fear had become stronger than compassion, and silence made everyone guilty. The procession disappeared into the forest. No one spoke. Only the sound of chains tied around Diane's wrists echoed through the trees. The deeper they walked, the colder the air became. Strange whispers floated between the branches. Sometimes they sounded like children laughing. Sometimes like women crying. No one dared turn around, because every one of them felt the same terrifying certainty. Something was following them. At the summit of the hill, the ancient pavilion stood waiting. Hundreds of black candles surrounded a stone altar stained by time. The mysterious man in black robes was already there, motionless, as though he had never left. He slowly raised his head. You came. The village chief lowered his eyes. We kept our promise. The stranger looked toward Diane. For the first time, his expression changed, almost like admiration. So, the Tulangwangi has arrived. Diane struggled against the rope. Tears streamed down her face. I've never hurt anyone. Please, let me go. The stranger stepped closer. His voice remained calm. You were never chosen because of what you've done. You were chosen because of what you are. He gently placed his hand above her forehead. Closing his eyes, he began chanting words in an ancient language no one else understood. The candles flared violently. The earth beneath them trembled. Every bird within the forest suddenly took flight at once. Far below, Mabakarto reached the edge of the clearing. He saw everything. The altar, the candles, the terrified girl. He tightened his grip on the wooden staff, then shouted with every strength he had left. Stop! His voice thundered through the forest. Every head turned toward him. The old man stepped forward. His eyes burned with fury. You fools! You believe darkness gives gifts? It only gives loans. And one day, it collects every debt. The robed stranger smiled. You are too late. Mbakarto rushed toward the altar, but before he reached it, an invisible force hurled him backward. He crashed violently against an ancient banyan tree. Blood trickled from his forehead. Still, he struggled to stand. Diane, close your eyes! And pray! With tears streaming down her face, Diane obeyed. She whispered every prayer she could remember. Her trembling voice echoed beneath the storm cloud. Then, everything changed. The wind exploded through the forest. Every candle went out simultaneously. The ground split open beneath the altar. A deafening scream echoed from somewhere beneath the earth. Not human, not animal, something far older, far hungrier. The jasmine fragrance became overwhelming, almost unbearable. One by one, the villagers fell to their knees, covering their ears. The stranger in black slowly spread his arms. The bargain has been accepted. A blinding darkness swallowed the altar. For one brief second, Diane looked toward Bakarto. She smiled. Not in fear, not in anger, but in forgiveness. Then, she vanished. The darkness collapsed inward. The candles reignited by themselves. The forest fell silent. There was no body, no blood, no trace that Diane had ever been there. Only a single white jasmine flower resting upon the cold stone altar. No one spoke. The village chief dropped to his knees. His hands trembled uncontrollably. What have we done? The robed man turned toward the 6 conspirators one last time. You have purchased prosperity. But remember this, every debt will eventually be paid. He stepped backward into the darkness and disappeared, as though he had never existed. Behind them, Bakarto remained kneeling in the mud, tears mixed with the rain that had finally begun to fall. After months of drought, the heavens had opened. Rain poured across Wonosari. The rivers would flow again. The fields would live again. The village had received exactly what it wanted. But deep inside the forest, an innocent soul had been traded for that miracle. And somewhere beyond the veil separating the living from the dead, something else had awakened. The rain did not stop. For 7 days, for 7 nights. The cracked earth drank every drop as though it had been waiting for years. The dry river overflowed once again. The rice fields, once lifeless and gray, slowly turned emerald green. Seeds that had long been buried beneath the hardened soil suddenly began to sprout. The drought was over. The people of Wonosari celebrated. Children ran through the muddy streets laughing. Farmers cried as they watched water return to their fields. For the first time in months, there was hope. The harvest that followed became the greatest anyone could remember. Rice grew taller than a man's waist. Fruit trees bent beneath the weight of their harvest. Livestock multiplied. Merchants arrived from distant towns to buy Wonosari's crops. Within only a few years, the village had become one of the wealthiest in the region. People called it a miracle. Only a handful knew it was something else. At first, the villagers searched desperately for Diane. Her mother wandered through the forest every morning, calling her daughter's name until her voice gave out. Her father searched every river, every hill, every abandoned path. Nothing. No footprints. No torn clothing. No body. Only silence. After months passed, the authorities declared her missing. After a year, people slowly stopped asking. Life moved on. But for her parents, time had frozen on the night she disappeared. Diane's mother never celebrated another village festival. Every evening, she placed a bowl of warm rice beside the family window, just in case her daughter found her way home. Neighbors tried to comfort her. Some whispered that Diane had simply run away. Others believed wild animals had taken her deep into the forest. No explanation ever eased a mother's heart. Her father changed as well. Once known as a cheerful man, he became quiet. He rarely smiled. He stopped joining harvest celebrations. Sometimes villagers saw him standing alone beside the forest, staring into the trees, as if waiting for someone to call his name. Only Bakarto knew the truth, or at least enough of it. The old elder carried a burden heavier than anyone could imagine. Every year, on the night of Tuesday Legi during Suro, he walked alone into the forest. He placed fresh jasmine flowers upon the abandoned stone altar. Then he prayed, not for himself, but for the innocent soul that had never received a proper burial. Each year, he noticed something strange. The jasmine flowers always disappeared before sunrise. The 6 men who had made the bargain tried to bury the past. None of them ever spoke of that night again, not even among themselves. Whenever their paths crossed, they avoided each other's eyes. Silence had become their only agreement. But guilt never truly sleeps. The village chief began suffering from terrible nightmares. Every night, he dreamed of muddy footprints leading from his bedroom door. The footprints always stopped beside his bed. Whenever he looked up, someone stood there, a young woman. Her face hidden behind long black hair. She never spoke. She simply stood there, dripping with rainwater, watching. The dream ended the same way every time. The room filled with the scent of fresh jasmine. Then, he woke screaming. The wealthy rice merchant, who had once tried to leave the pavilion before the sacrifice, could no longer bear the weight of his conscience. His fortune grew. His lands expanded. His family prospered. Yet every time he looked into a mirror, he thought he saw another face standing behind his own. A young woman, smiling sadly. One morning, he packed a small bag, left his home, and disappeared without telling anyone where he was going. Some believed he had become a wandering pilgrim. Others believed he had simply gone searching for forgiveness. He was never seen again. The remaining conspirators met less and less as the years passed. One died from a sudden illness. Another took his own life after claiming someone whispered outside his window every night. The others dismissed these events as coincidence. But deep inside, they all feared the same possibility. Perhaps the debt had already begun to collect itself. As for Wonosari, its prosperity continued. New homes replaced old wooden huts. The village built a larger mosque. Roads were repaired. Children attended better schools. Visitors admired how fortunate the village had become. They called it blessed. No one knew that every brick, every field, every grain of rice had been purchased with the life of an innocent girl. Years slipped quietly by. 1, 3, 7, 10. Then, the 13th year arrived. Bakarto's hair had turned completely white. His steps had grown slower. His hands trembled whenever he held his prayer beads. Deep inside, he felt something changing. The air itself seemed different. He had sensed it for weeks. Birds had begun leaving the forest earlier than usual. Dogs barked toward empty roads after midnight. Children spoke of hearing a woman singing near the river. Always the same melody, always carried by the wind. One evening, Bacarto opened the old Javanese calendar hanging inside his house. His tired eyes searched silently across the dates. When they finally reached the coming week, his breathing stopped. Once again, after 13 long years, Tuesday Legi would fall upon the first night of Suro. The prayer beads slipped from his trembling hands, scattering across the wooden floor. The old man slowly closed his eyes, then whispered the words he had prayed he would never have to say. "The time has come. She is coming home." That same night, far beyond the edge of the forest, deep beneath the roots of the ancient banyan tree, a single white jasmine flower, Endetiplade, slowly bloomed. Although no human eyes were there to witness it, the flower suddenly withered. Its white petals turned dark, almost black. Then, without warning, a soft sound echoed through the empty forest. A young woman, taking her very first breath after 13 years of silence. For 13 years, Wonosari had known nothing but prosperity. The harvests never failed. The rivers never ran dry. Children grew up hearing stories about the terrible drought, but to them, it sounded like nothing more than an old legend. Time had buried the truth, or so everyone believed. As the month of Suro approached once again, something subtle began to change. It started with the animals. Dogs refused to leave their homes after sunset. Buffaloes became restless without reason. Flocks of birds abandoned the forest days earlier than usual. Even the cicadas, whose songs had filled every summer night, fell completely silent. The village felt as though it was waiting. On the evening before Tuesday Legi, an elderly woman was sweeping the front yard of her home. As she gathered fallen leaves, she suddenly caught the unmistakable fragrance of fresh jasmine. She smiled. There must be a wedding nearby. She looked around. There were no flowers, no guests, no music. The scent vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The next morning, she was found dead in her bed. Her face wore an expression of absolute terror. The village doctor could find no explanation. 3 nights later, a group of children claimed they saw a young woman standing beside the old river. She wore a simple white dress. Her long black hair covered most of her face. One little boy waved happily. "Miss?" The woman slowly lifted her head. The children screamed. Her eyes were completely black. By the time frightened adults reached the riverbank, she was gone. Only the fragrance of jasmine lingered in the air. Rumors spread quickly. Some dismissed the sightings as imagination. Others blamed wandering spirits from the nearby forest. Only one person did not doubt them for a second. Bacarto. The old man quietly returned to the abandoned altar deep inside the forest. For 13 years, he had placed fresh jasmine flowers there every Suro. This time, the altar was empty. Not because the flowers had disappeared, because they had never remained there at all. The stone surface was covered instead with fresh muddy footprints, bare feet, small, delicate, leading away from the altar toward the village. Mimbacarto fell to his knees. His voice trembled. The debt has come due. That same night, the village chief awoke shortly after midnight. Something had disturbed his sleep. He wasn't sure what. His bedroom felt strangely cold. The oil lamp beside his bed had gone out. He sat up slowly. Then he heard it. Tap, tap, bare footsteps, walking outside his bedroom, very slowly, as though someone wanted him to know they were there. He swallowed hard. Who's there? No answer. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then the fragrance of jasmine drifted beneath the bedroom door. His heart nearly stopped. He remembered, after 13 years, he remembered everything. His trembling hand reached for the door. Every instinct told him not to open it, yet something stronger pulled him forward. Slowly, he turned the handle. The hallway was empty. No one. Nothing. Only darkness. He exhaled in relief. Then he looked down. The wooden floor was soaked with muddy footprints. Fresh, as though someone had just walked through the house. They led toward the front door. He followed them. Each step felt heavier than the last. The footprints stopped, directly in front of an old family photograph hanging on the wall. A photograph taken only months before Jayan disappeared. Everyone from the village council was smiling proudly, including him. Across the surface of the glass, someone had written a single sentence. Not with ink, with water. Do you remember me? The village chief stumbled backward. His breathing became frantic. No! This isn't real. He wiped the glass with his shaking hand. The words disappeared. For a moment, he laughed nervously. I'm losing my mind. Then, another sentence slowly formed beneath his fingertips. I never forgot you. The oil lamp behind him suddenly reignited by itself. A woman's soft laughter echoed somewhere inside the house. Very close, yet impossible to locate. Across the village, similar events unfolded. One conspirator found muddy footprints circling his bed. Another woke to discover jasmine flowers covering his dining table. A third heard a young woman softly humming outside his bedroom window until sunrise. Every one of them received a different warning. But the message was always the same. She had returned, and she remembered every face. The following morning, the village chief summoned the remaining conspirators in secret. When the last man entered the room, everyone immediately noticed the same thing. No one had slept. Every face looked pale. Every pair of eyes carried fear. Before anyone could speak, one of the men whispered, "You saw her too." No one answered. They didn't need to. Their silence confirmed everything. The village chief slowly stood. For the first time in 13 years, his voice no longer carried authority, only regret. We buried the truth. But we buried it alive. Outside, thunder rolled across the distant hills. Although the sky remained perfectly clear, Mbakarto, standing alone at the edge of the forest, closed his eyes as the familiar scent of jasmine surrounded him once more. Then, through the whispering wind, he heard the same gentle voice he had not heard in 13 years. Not angry, not screaming, simply calling his name. Mba. The old man's eyes filled with tears. Diane? The breeze faded. But before it disappeared completely, one final whisper drifted through the trees. It's time. Far beyond the village, inside the ancient forest, a young woman dressed in white slowly emerged from the shadows. Her bare feet left no sound upon the earth. Her long black hair moved gently in the wind. When she finally lifted her face toward the moon, her eyes were no longer completely black. They looked almost human again. Almost. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Then, she smiled. Not with joy, but with the quiet certainty that justice had finally begun. Justice rarely arrives all at once. It comes, one confession at a time, one sleepless night at a time, one guilty soul after another. The haunting grew worse. No one in Wonosari spoke openly about it, but everyone felt it. Every night, someone heard footsteps outside their home. Every morning, fresh jasmine flowers appeared where none had been planted. Children refused to walk near the forest. The elders stopped leaving their homes after sunset. Even the village mosque felt strangely empty after evening prayers. Fear had returned. This time, it belonged to everyone. The village chief could no longer endure the nightmares. For 7 consecutive nights, he saw the same dream. Diane stood silently beside his bed. She never accused him. She never screamed. She simply asked the same question. Why? Then she vanished, leaving only the scent of jasmine and muddy footprints across the floor. On the 8th morning, he broke. He went searching for Mbakarto. The old man was already waiting outside his home, almost as though he knew this moment would come. The village chief collapsed to his knees. His voice trembled. We killed her. The confession hung in the morning air. For 13 years. Those words had never been spoken aloud. Now, they could never be taken back. Mbakarto closed his eyes. I already knew. The village chief looked up, tears streaming down his face. Then why didn't you expose us? The old elder sighed. Because no punishment created by men could ever equal the punishment created by guilt. He paused. And now, the debt has finally come due. By sunset, the remaining conspirators had gathered inside the village hall. Every face reflected exhaustion. Every voice carried fear. The village chief stood before them. "We cannot hide anymore." One man slammed his fist onto the table. "If we confess, the entire village will hate us." Another whispered, "If we don't, they'll kill us." Silence. Finally, Bacardo stepped forward. "There is only one path left. You must return. What was stolen?" The men exchanged nervous glances. "What do you mean?" The old elder pointed toward the forest. "Diane never received a proper burial. Her soul was never allowed to rest. We must find her." That night, the villagers followed Mbakarto into the ancient forest. For the first time in 13 years, they returned to the abandoned altar. Nature had nearly reclaimed it. Roots twisted around the cracked stone. Moss covered the carvings. Yet the air remained unnaturally cold. The fragrance of jasmine lingered, stronger than ever. Mbakarto slowly raised his walking staff. "Dig." No one moved. The village chief lowered his head. Then, he picked up a shovel. One by one, the others followed. The sound of metal striking earth echoed through the silent forest. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Nothing. Some villagers began losing hope. Perhaps there was nothing beneath the altar after all. Then, clang, one shovel struck something hard. Everyone froze. The men carefully brushed away the remaining soil. A small wooden chest emerged from the earth. It had almost completely rotted away. The village chief's hands shook violently as he opened it. Inside rested the fragile skeletal remains of a young woman. Around her neck hung a faded wooden prayer bead necklace. The very one Mbakarto had given Diane on the night before she disappeared. The old man fell to his knees. His tears flowed freely. "We found you." Across the crowd, Diane's elderly parents stepped forward. Time had turned their hair white. Their bodies had grown frail. But the moment they saw the necklace, they knew. Her mother let out a cry so heartbreaking that even the wind seemed to stop. She embraced the tiny remains, as though holding her daughter one last time. "I promised I would never stop waiting for you." Her father stood beside her, unable to speak. His tears said everything words never could. Without warning, the forest grew dark. The temperature dropped sharply. Every candle carried by the villagers extinguished at once. Only moonlight remained. Then, someone appeared, standing beside the ancient banyan tree, a young woman dressed in white. Her long black hair moved gently in the wind. This time, her face was visible. She looked exactly as she had 13 years earlier. Young, gentle, beautiful, no longer terrifying, only deeply sad. No one dared move. The village chief slowly approached her. His legs trembled with every step. When he stood only a few feet away, he collapsed onto his knees. "I'm sorry. I traded your life for our happiness. I have no excuse. If my life can repay yours, then take it." For several moments, the spirit remained silent. The jasmine fragrance surrounded everyone. Then she spoke. Her voice was soft, almost like the wind itself. "No life can purchase another." The village chief closed his eyes, expecting death. Instead, he felt only warmth. When he looked up again, Diane was smiling. Not because she had forgotten Folklore, but because she had finally been heard. She slowly turned toward Mbakarto. "Thank you for never forgetting me." The old man bowed his head. "I failed to save you. You gave me something greater," he replied. "You remembered." As her words faded, the clouds above the forest slowly parted. Moonlight bathed the ancient altar. For the first time in 13 years, the overwhelming scent of jasmine began to disappear. The cold wind became gentle, yet the oppressive darkness lifted. The villagers looked around in disbelief. It felt as though the forest itself had taken its first peaceful breath in years. But Mbakarto knew one final duty still remained. The truth had been uncovered. The guilty had confessed. Diane had been found. Now, she needed what had been denied to her for 13 long years. A proper farewell. Only then could the debt truly be settled. The following morning, the entire village gathered beneath a sky unlike any they had seen in years. The air felt lighter. The forest no longer seemed threatening. For the first time in 13 years, the fragrance of jasmine no longer carried fear, it carried peace. Mbakarto gently wrapped Dian's fragile remains in a clean white burial cloth. Every movement was slow, respectful. No one spoke. Even the children instinctively remained silent. The only sound was the soft rustling of leaves and birds singing once again from the forest. Nature itself seemed to understand. Diane's mother rested her trembling hand upon the white cloth. "My daughter, I finally found you. 13 years of unanswered prayers, of sleepless nights, of waiting beside an empty doorway, had finally come to an end." She no longer cried. Her tears had become something quieter, accepted. The funeral prayer was held just before sunset. The entire village stood shoulder to shoulder, not because tradition demanded it, but because every heart carried the same burden: regret. One by one, the villagers lowered their heads. Some whispered prayers, others silently asked forgiveness. No one left early. No one looked away. For the first time in 13 years, Wonosari mourned the daughter it had abandoned. When the burial was complete, and then the village chief stepped forward, he faced the crowd with tears in his eyes. "My name, my position, my honor, none of them matter anymore." He paused, then continued. 13 years ago, I chose prosperity over innocence. I convinced myself that sacrificing one life could save many others. I was wrong. There is no blessing built upon the suffering of the innocent. I accept whatever punishment awaits me. The villagers remained silent, not because they had forgiven him, but because they knew he would spend the rest of his life carrying a sentence far heavier than any prison could impose. That night, Bakarto returned alone to the ancient altar. For the final time, he placed a single white jasmine flower upon the cold stone. Then he bowed his head. "You may rest now." The wind gently stirred the trees. The flower's petals lifted into the air, spinning slowly like tiny white feathers. When they touched the ground, they vanished. Bakarto smiled. He understood. She had accepted his farewell. As he turned to leave, he heard footsteps behind him, soft, barefoot. He stopped. Slowly, he looked over his shoulder. Diane stood beneath the old banyan tree, no longer pale, no longer surrounded by darkness. She looked exactly as she had before the drought, a simple white dress, gentle eyes, a peaceful smile. She raised one hand in farewell, no words. They were no longer needed. Bakarto smiled through his tears. "Go in peace." She nodded. Then, little by little, golden light surrounded her. Her figure became transparent. The fragrance of jasmine drifted through the forest one final time. Warm, gentle, comforting. And then, she was gone. The following week, strange things happened. Not terrifying things, beautiful things. The nightmares ended. The muddy footprints never returned. Children laughed freely near the river again. Dogs no longer barked into empty darkness. Birds nested once more beneath the old banyan tree. The forest had become peaceful. Years later, travelers often visited Wonosari. They admired its fertile fields, its kind people, and the giant banyan tree standing quietly at the edge of the forest. Sometimes, they noticed fresh jasmine flowers blooming nearby. No one knew who planted them. The villagers never gave a detailed explanation. Instead, they simply smiled and treated the flowers with quiet respect. Because some stories are remembered not to frighten future generations, but to remind them what greed can destroy. Old age finally caught up with Mbakarto. On the final evening of his life, he sat peacefully on the porch of his home. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. A familiar fragrance drifted through the air. Fresh jasmine. He smiled. "I know. You're here." A gentle breeze brushed across his face. For just a brief moment, he thought he heard a young woman softly whisper, "Thank you." He closed his eyes, and never opened them again. His face wore the same peaceful smile that had once belonged to Deanne. Some legends say that on rare nights, when Tuesday Legi coincides with the first night of Suro, the fragrance of jasmine still drifts through the forests surrounding Wonosari. But those who breathe it in feel no fear, only an overwhelming sense of peace, as though a long-forgotten soul had finally found her way home. People often believe that evil spirits haunt the places where they died, but sometimes what truly lingers is not hatred, it is injustice, because a soul that has been heard, remembered, and finally laid to rest no longer seeks revenge, only peace. And perhaps the most terrifying monsters were never the spirits hiding in the darkness, but the ordinary people who convinced themselves that doing something evil was for the greater good. The end.